This is Legislative Review on Prairie Public. I'm Dave Thompson. Thanks for joining us today. Our guest on the program is Senator Joan Heckaman from New Rockford. She's a Democrat and also is the Assistant Senate Minority Leader. Senator, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me today, Dave. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you.
Well, there are a few things we do need to talk about at the top, and one, of course, was Governor Dalrymple did sign a number of abortion bills, 3 of them. You were a part of a group, and I think you've been credited as being one of the organizers of a group who met with the governor, I believe, last week to urge him not to sign the bills. Is that correct?
That's correct, Dave. We took a bipartisan group into his office and addressed some of the concerns that we had if these bills were signed into order, and presented our case to the governor on those issues. We presented several different concerns that we had, and despite those concerns, he signed those bills yesterday, and as they go forward, I think we're going into definitely some uncharted territory for the state and to the nation. Definitely those bills will bring some form of litigation forward. We're hoping that while that's going on, that things continue to go well for the women's health in the state of North Dakota. But one of our big concerns is the amount of money that is probably going to have to be spent on litigation. We certainly know that there could be a number of other issues that those funds could be spent that are needs in our state right now.
No idea about how much you'd have to budget, because the governor asked the legislature to set aside some money to defend these bills.
That's correct, Dave. We haven't heard any figure. When 3 of the bills were on the Senate side, our caucus tried to put in $1 million in each of those bills as a means to provide some funding for litigation, and those amendments were not successful. So I don't have any idea what the governor will ask for right now, so we'll have to wait and see what that turns out to be.
Your objections to the bill came down to what issues?
My objections to the bills were the constitutionality. In my visiting with some of the people promoting the bills, I asked for a list of which bills would be constitutional and which would be unconstitutional, and no one could give me a list of those that are constitutional right now. So with that understanding and the oath that we take as legislators to uphold the North Dakota Constitution and the U.S. Constitution, I have to look at, besides the content of the bill, the legality of the bill.
These are meant to be, I believe the sponsors do mean it to be a direct challenge to Roe versus Wade.
I think they are, and the governor has stated that too. I understand that going forward, but we have so many other issues that we need that money for in the state of North Dakota too. So looking down the path, we don't know where that's going to go. Like I said, uncharted waters for certain.
Let's go to the education issue.
Certainly.
Because you're on the Education Committee and you've got the big education funding bill 1319. It actually doesn't have money in it, but it shows how to spend the money, if I remember correctly.
That's correct.
It's also the vehicle for property tax relief. And the House made some changes, and I understand that your committee is going through it with a fine-tooth comb and looking at some potential changes as well.
Yes, we did. We finished up most of our amendment work today. It will go to Legislative Council for putting these amendments into the correct sections that they are. One thing that we did do is that the House changed. We reduced the mill levy back from 70 mills down to 50 mills, and we did that with an amendment. So that's a big change, so we know that the bill will certainly go to conference committee.
Is that a cap? Is 50 mills a cap?
50 mills is a cap in a way, but there are some other exemptions in the portion of the bill. They've lumped another portion of things under a 12 mill levy that each district can levy. And then there's also a 10 mill waiver that they can use over in the top of that without going to their voters. And then there's 3 mills for a reserve fund. So when you get all done with looking at it, it will be in the range of 75 mills.
But in that respect, you and the governor are on the same page, because he suggested 50 in the original bill.
Certainly, Dave, that's correct. And that's one of the reasons I think the Senate supports that 50 mill levy right now. With the 70 mills, as the way it was coming from the House, it brought the mill levy up into the range of 95 mills that a district could levy for education. And there are some districts out there that are below that already, and there are some that are in that range. And so my concern was that property tax valuations would not go down, and you would not see that reduction as expected.
Now, in previous sessions, when you talked about education funding, there was always the joke about, here's an amendment, we go up to DPI, run the computer numbers and find out how districts do, who's winning, who's losing. Is it different this time?
Well, certainly there have been some of that happening. The governor's office ran some numbers for my district, and my district will probably be one of the lower districts around the state for increases. But there is a hold harmless in this bill, so no districts will get any less than they're getting in the 2012-2013 school year. And so that's a comfort to some of the districts. However, some of the districts may not get an increase over that for the next 2 years of the biennium.
Now, there was also a problem with reservation districts.
There certainly was, and that was corrected. When the House put an amendment on, they were not with the understanding of how this amendment affected the tribal schools. And after they saw what happened, and it was, we found that out in the Senate, there was an effort to make that change, and that was all already amended in. So there's changes have been made to that portion.
Also, the North Dakota Education Association has been pushing the idea of a minimum teacher's salary to raise it from $22,500 to $32,000 a year. I was going to ask if that amendment has been introduced. Has it been talked about in your committee?
I introduced that amendment and brought it forward to the Education Committee. The $32,000 was laid on the table. It was defeated in the committee. My talking points on that were that if you take out child care for a young family, you take out living expenses such as car, home, you take out the taxes and the teacher's retirement, there's not much left out of $27,500. In fact, there were some numbers run that there'd only be about $340 left for all the rest of the expenses, and that might include portions of their health care, a lot of different things that's not a lot to live on.
Now, there are some people who I've heard talk in the halls who said, should the state be setting a minimum wage for teachers? Isn't that the purview of local districts? I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, certainly there's local control, and we have to be concerned about that. But the state has always set a minimum salary. In fact, the $22,000 that was just changed in the bill itself has been there for 10 years. And when you look at those kind of wages for a person coming out of college with a 4-year degree, student loans, and an expectation of what's called a profession, I don't think going to $32,000 is out of line. $32,000 is about the average starting salary for a teacher in the state of North Dakota, and we're sitting down towards the bottom of the 50 states with that. And certainly we need to increase that so that we have young people stay in our state. We have excellent teacher colleges here in North Dakota. We train good people, we have good people, other states want them, but let's keep them here and show them that we value their workforce ability, the contributions they make to our communities, and let's keep our young teachers in the state.
Will you try to offer that as a floor amendment?
I'm considering that. I'm considering a couple options right now to a floor amendment, and we'll see how that comes along as we proceed on the floor vote with that.
Of course, we have the case where this bill is going to have to go to appropriations, and maybe an attempt could be made at appropriations too.
Certainly there's a number of options yet for us. It will go to conference committee too. And during that time, we can't make any major amendments, but we could make a change to that in the fact that it's still a portion of the bill. You can change what's in the bill, you can't add or language that's not been considered in the bill. So.
Now, the price tag for the moving it to past the 70% level, I think is total price tag's about $800 million, if I'm correct.
I think that's correct. Right, that's correct, Dave. It's in about that range right now. We've done some adding and some deleting of some weighting factors today, and so when you do that, it's hard to see the bottom number right now until we get those figures back from council.
I remember asking a state senator about 4 or 5 years ago, in 25 words or less, describe North Dakota's education funding formula. He looked at me and had 2 words, not enough. But this formula is still very complicated because you brought up the weighting factors thing and the amendments that you're looking at, that not every district is the same as another district. So there are some challenges there.
Well, there certainly are, and especially when you get to what's called property-rich districts that have a lot of land, but not many students. And those are the kinds of districts that probably will not see as big an increase in their funding as other school districts. And equity and adequacy have been also always a concern of funding the education system in North Dakota, and we need to continue that. So we'll see how these numbers with the weighting factor changes, and it's hard to tell districts where they're going to be until conference committee gets done. And I certainly don't want to hurt any districts, and with the hold harmless, we expect not to do that.
Is there a danger that this bill may be so many amendments to it that it may collapse under its own weight?
Well, I certainly hope not. I think there are some good intentions in this bill. The work that's been done on it is certainly moving it forward into a simpler formula that's easier to understand, and takes into a lot of considerations other things that schools have, such as special education students, ELL learners, and those kinds of things. It still considers those as weighting factors, and I think we've got some good things in the bill that we certainly need to keep. There are some things that probably could be changed in there yet. So.
Of course, another set of eyes, the Appropriations Committee is going to have to take a look at this too and then fit it into the whole budget pie to see what's going to happen. And of course, the governor has also said that this is the vehicle that he likes for property tax reform. Yet there are going to be some others that may go on top of that as well.
There are, and on a daily basis right now, or an hourly basis, we're hearing from our appropriations people in finance and tax what's going on in other bills. And that's really an interesting factor right now because there's a lot to keep track of and a lot to track at this point in the session.
So basically the word is stay tuned, because you're of ways from being done with it on the Senate side. Then it goes back to the House, then the Conference Committee. The third period of the three-period hockey game is what it's been described as.
Certainly is. And there, like you say, there's a lot of work to be done, and things could change, and there are moving things in the bill right now, I'm sure.
I'd like to switch gears again and talk about early childhood education and child care, because those are two that have turned into kind of controversial issues in the legislature, especially early childhood education. Now, are you on that bill?
I am. I've been on the child care bill, and I'm not on the early childhood education bill per se as a prime sponsor, but I certainly support all the movements that we're having. We've had a lot of discussion in the organization session as well as in the early parts of this session. What's the best way to move forward on early childhood education, on child care, and on Head Start? And how can we merge those three programs into a workable program that benefits our working families so that they don't have to take children to Head Start for 2 days and then figure out how to get off their jobs at noon to go and pick those children up, and sort of mesh those three programs together. I think that would be an optimal program for the state of North Dakota. And one of the other options that we've looked at is actually moving early childhood teachers from the school out into the child care facilities. We think that's sort of like a reverse education program, and we think that can benefit families too, where they wouldn't have to be moving the children during the day.
How far are the discussions along in merging those programs?
Well, Dave, they're just starting right now. We did some early consultation on them, like I said, in the early part of the session, and put in basically 3 separate bills. And those 3 separate bills are probably all going to merge into a study together, which probably needs to be done. I think that we have a lot of powerful people that know a lot about early childhood education. I'm a little disappointed right now that we don't have an opportunity to provide some funds to our schools that want to start a pre-K program right now. There were some funds for that, and we can still see if we can carry that through to the end of the session. But there are schools out there that are opting for pre-K programs and really see the value in them and how important they are to the progress of the child as they go through the early years of elementary school. And the data is outstanding and overwhelming on how those programs are important, whether it's pre-K or Head Start. All of those are very, very important, and the data's there. We just have not been able to click that with the program right now, and that's still one of our focuses, is to do that before the end of the session.
You know, you talk about early childhood education and child care, Head Start. There seems to be a real need for it in North Dakota, and I put it to you this way: the 2020 study that was done talked about child care as the #1 issue, and that's to help businesses out, if nothing else.
It certainly is, and it's a part of economic development. I always look at it this way: as if we don't have adequate childcare, we won't have families that can go out and work. And one of the things in North Dakota, I think, is because we are a small state, we have people with areas of expertise who aren't able to go out and get into the work areas just because they can't find childcare. And if you can find adequate childcare, some of the people that have good expertise in certain areas will be able to go and help our state go forward. But without that, we're looking at the cost of childcare is just huge right now. In Dickinson, 2 children, 2 years old and an infant, are about $16,000 a year. And when you look at that, let's say it was a teacher. Let's say it was a teacher going to put their children in childcare. $27,500, and you prorate that over 9 months, $12,000 out of that alone for childcare. Makes teaching almost an impossible profession, and childcare almost an impossible to pull forward. So there's a lot of need out there. Minot is an area of huge need, but the whole state. Even in my district, I visited with people at a forum this weekend, and one of the concerns is they live on a farm outside of a small town in my district. They drive their daughter to preschool or Head Start in one town. They take their son to daycare in another town. So they're going west one time and east the other time, and they live in the middle. So, in rural areas, it makes it even more difficult. So there's huge need out there. I'm not sure what more we can tell with the study. Right now, the statistics from the 2020 are overwhelmingly supportive of increasing not only the facilities, but having the child care providers have some kind of means to provide adequate staff and a salary to those staff comparative to what's in the community.
And those are some really big challenges right now to offer that. And then you're up against a philosophical argument by some members of the legislature saying that the state should not be in the business of funding daycares or child care or pre-K or early childhood education.
And that's certainly the issue. We've had a number of people that come in and testify. When the child care bill came before Human Services in the Senate, there was standing room only even out in the hallway. I mean, the hallway was completely full of people concerned about this, as it should be. This is something that's very important, and we need to address this. We still need to address this session.
About higher education, your committee did take a look at the higher education, the new funding models for that, and some of the issues in higher education as well, correct?
We certainly did. The new funding formula comes out that's coming out is based on outcomes. It's not based on the number of students you have enrolled. It's based on the number of credits these students earn. And I think that that's a good a way to look at it, because you're not going to be keeping these students in your colleges any longer, or if you are, you're going to provide some kind of support to move them on. About a third of the credits that students enroll in are either withdrawn, dropped, or failed before the end of an academic year. And so we need to look at that, and maybe this funding formula will move that forward. And it hasn't been tried here in North Dakota, and if it pulls through both chambers and probably a conference committee, it'll be interesting to see if that's a good method of providing support for our higher education system.
There seems to be a lot of support for that kind of change, though.
There's support for any kind of change in higher education right now. We have an outstanding university system. I think we put out one of the best products in any state around. Our graduates, no matter what program they are always wanted in other states for employment. And so it isn't that our university system is broken right now. There are certainly a lot of concerns, as has been shown in the media and the press, and there are concerns out there. But I don't think any of them are unfixable. I think there are ways to fix all of these. And our college students are going right on forward despite all of the press and the media that has brought forth some issues.
Do you think there are distractions in some respects?
I think they are. I think there's certainly distractions to the flow of the administrative policies. The students maybe don't see it on a daily basis in the classrooms, but I think the administration of the university see this right now, and it's certainly taking away from some of the focus on the academics.
Of course, the tension between legislators and the university system has been there almost since the Round Table was established in the late 1990s, but it seems like it's coming to a little bit of a boil this time.
Well, it certainly is. You know, I've been here, this is my 4th session. It seems like every session there are some concerns about that. You know, I think that we're looking for good people on the Board of Higher Education. We're looking for a chancellor to come in and do good work. And I don't know, you know, on a daily basis how that's going. You hear a lot of things. But my concern is let's keep the universities going and keep our students in mind with all of this. That's the bottom line. What are our students able to accomplish? And let's keep our good programs going because we have an excellent university system.
Well, I'm going to put you on the spot for just a
Okay.
second. What do you think of the current board and chancellor of higher education? Do you have any strong feelings either way about them?
I sat in on audit and fiscal review, and we reviewed the audit of the university system office. There were some recommendations that came through there. I'm not sure right now if anyone would be happy with any kind of a chancellor right now. And I'm not sure if anyone would be happy with any kind of a board right now, because as soon as we go forward with one issue, someone else seems to find another issue. And I think that's really, you talked about detracting. I think it's detracting right now. So I guess I can't speak on what the board's doing and speak on what the chancellor is doing other than what we heard in the audit. And there were some recommendations, but some of those recommendations came from the 24 months of the prior chancellor. So we have to keep that in mind too.
I know that there was, of course, the effort to give the board money to buy out the current chancellor. And yet there seems to be another feeling that, you know, the chancellor hasn't been on the job yet a year, and maybe you should give him time. I don't know how you feel about either one of those.
Well, that bill came forward. I did not support it at the time. I don't know if that's the thing to do as soon as we get someone in and in 3 months we're not happy with them. My thoughts on anyone that takes a job is there should be some corrective actions coming forward, and the board is the overseer of the chancellor. So I think that the board should, you know, if they step up and do their job, I think we can have a good university system. We've got the colleges, we've got the teachers, we've got the students. Each individual campus is running very well by themselves, but it seems to be the oversight right now needs to get a little bit better handle on that.
So if you had your druthers, then you would help oversight somehow?
Not by the legislature.
Not by the legislature, though.
No, not by the legislature, Dave. I think that we have a board. It's in the Constitution. I think that's their job. I think it's just like the board of a school board. They have a job to do, and I think some of them are really digging down and figuring out what that job is. I've seen that in the news too. So.
As if you hadn't had enough work to do, your B committee, the Thursday-Friday committee, agriculture did have a pretty contentious issue, and that's that animal cruelty measure that was introduced.
We did, yes. That bill came first forward into the Senate. We had a very good hearing in the Senate. We had a few amendments on it and passed it out in pretty good shape to the House. I haven't had an opportunity to see how it's going right now, but I understand that there have been a number of changes in the bill.
Are you concerned because there was supposed to be the measure that was on the ballot? It failed because at least there was the coalition that said we've got a legislative committee or a legislative bill that's going to go in. We've been working on it. It's going to solve some of the problems. But are you concerned that if they make too many changes to the bill that was introduced, we may see another initiated measure on that subject?
I think that's the concern of the committee as a whole when we heard the bill, and of the sponsors too of the bill. When they came in, they thought they had a really good product, and we thought it was really in pretty good shape too. It's disappointing to see the tentacles that are starting to come out on that bill and the changes that could be made on it, because the coalition that developed that bill felt that it answered everything that North Dakota needs without outside interests coming in.
And of course, one of the main things was a felony animal abuse statute, which North Dakota did not have, one of the 2 states that did not have it.
That's correct. And what I heard from some individual people in the legal system, they felt that that was a good addition. And the reason it was a good addition is there were not enough teeth in the bill or in the law right now to take care of some of those issues. And this gave the judicial system one more tool to use when it came to some of those issues.
Well, we have a couple minutes left, and I haven't done this with any other guests, but I'm going to do it with you because it just came to my mind. First, what do you think the highlight of the session has been so far? The highlight.
The highlight? You know, it's hard to say. Everybody's feeling that this is a different session than any other session. It's moving in a different direction. It's moving, changes are being made in a different way than any other session has been made. I can't say it's a highlight of the session, but I do have to say the memorial service is always very touching.
Oh, yes.
I really think that that's very touching.
It was.
So.
Well, thank you very much. We
Thank
have run out of the time, and there are a lot more issues we could talk about, and maybe we can get you back.
Thank you. I appreciate being here.
Our guest today is Senator Joan Heckaman from New Rockford, North Dakota. She's a Democrat and also the Assistant Senate Minority Leader. For Prairie Public and Legislative Review, I'm Dave Thompson.